In this lesson, we're going to look at design and the environment. We're going to explore a number of practical steps that we as designers can take to protect the planet, to protect its resources, and ultimately improve the lives for the people and the societies who exist here. But before we get into those practical steps, we've got to examine some big ideas. And we've got three big ideas that we're going to cover first of all. The first thing we're going to look at is consumerism, then sustainability, and finally the product life cycle. And after all of that, once our understanding of those three things is clear, we're going to ask ourselves about what the designer's role is in all of this. So, lots to get through. Let's start with consumerism. Now, we live in a consumerist society. So some people say. But what does this mean? And once you know what it means, do you actually agree with this claim? Well, you can pause the video now if you'd like to have a think about that or a discussion about it. But a consumerist society is a society that encourages us to buy and to use things, products and goods. And it is often said that the people in a consumerist society set their life goals and their happiness on the ongoing accumulation of these products. In other words, we are compelled and encouraged and forced to buy things over and over again. Now, how might consumerism affect the environment? Well, the main thing is that this constant manufacture of goods ultimately depletes the planet's resources. We mine things out of the ground, we chop things down, etc., etc. And in doing so, we generate a large amount of waste. And also in doing that, and if we think about the manufacturing and the factories and the logistics and the lorries and the planes that are required to suit a consumerist society, these things all create pollution as well, because we're so busy making things and selling things and using things that there's a lot of pollution around there. So there's three ways that we have to keep in mind that consumerism might affect the environment. Let's move on to our second big idea that we're going to get our heads around, and that is the idea of sustainability. Now, sustainability and the consumerist society are at odds with one another. There's a friction between them. They have to contend with each other. But what does this idea of sustainability actually mean? Well, if you want to have a discussion or a think about it, you can pause the video now. But sustainability, if you opened up a dictionary and looked at it, you discover that it literally means that something can be maintained for a long time. In other words, something can go on and on and on. In an environmental sense, sustainability is the idea that we can make use of the planet's resources at such a rate that they don't run out, that we do not deplete them. So sustainability is this idea that we're using up the planet's resources such that we can go on and on and on with them. And some examples of environmental sustainability might include a sustainable forest. This is a forest in which the rate at which the trees are cut down is the same as the rate at which they are planted. So in other words, the forest doesn't shrink in size. Another example might be renewable power. Renewable power can go on and on and on. We're not using up any of the Earth's resources, so it is said to be sustainable as well. And finally, if we look at something like fishing quotas, where nations that live around an ocean or a sea will get together and they will agree the limits on what fish numbers can be caught so that the fish numbers are sustained, that they can keep going on and on. And this idea of not depleting resources and sustainability is, as I say, at odds with the idea of consumerism, which may force us to forever consume the Earth's resources. These two things don't balance often. Now, the third big idea that we want to talk about before we get into practical steps is the idea of the product life cycle. Now, this idea argues that a product has a life. It is born, it lives, and it dies, exactly as a piece of organic life like you and I would inhabit things. Obviously, we're not talking about a product actually being alive, but nonetheless, it goes through these three distinct phases of being born, of living, and of dying again. Except we don't call it that. The birth phase we talk about is manufacture. In other words, a factory A manufacturer would source some components and raw materials. They would then go ahead and manufacture the thing that they're making. They would assemble it, put it into some packaging, and then they would pop it onto, say, I don't know, a train or a truck or a boat or something like that, and transfer it to a shop or a warehouse, something like that. Then we get into the next phase of the product life cycle, the use phase, right? So we turn up at this point, we go to the shop and we take the product home, whatever it is that we're buying, doesn't really matter, but we take it home and we unpack it and then we use it, right? And we may use it for a day, like a newspaper, or we may use it for several years, like a car or something like that. But we use it, and if we're clever about things, and if the product is well made and well designed, then we'll repair and we'll maintain the product, and we may even be lucky enough to be able to reuse the product again and again and again. So far we've covered birth and we've covered life. In other words, we've covered manufacture and use. And what about the death of a product? Well, this phase I call disposal. And disposal has two outcomes. Number one is the one we're familiar with, landfill, right? So we can see here, we can follow the dotted lines that we've used a product, follow the dotted lines, and it ends up in landfill. It ends up going to the dump. Even if we are smart and we've reused something over again, at some point that product may end up in a big hole in the ground covered over with mud and soil, landfill. However, some products, as you know, can be recycled. And the recycling involves the product's disassembly into different components again, and then put back into the product life cycle, put back into the manufacture chain. And so if we've got a product which is environmentally sound, if it's environmentally well designed, the product life cycle can resemble this circuit that goes round and round and round. However, all too often things end at landfill. So it begs the question then, what is the designer's role in all of this? Let's take a look at that now. We've got three sort of ways that I want to look at, three interventions that a designer can take in order to improve the environmental credentials of his or her product that they're designing. Design for recycling is a concept we'll look at in a moment. Design for reuse is a concept we'll look at in a moment. And finally, we'll also look at design for efficiency. Three ways that a designer can influence that product life cycle and these ideas of sustainability. Let's look at them one for one then. Let's start off with design for recycling. Now, had we been in class just now, we'd have a whole discussion about that Starbucks coffee cup there. And all the ways that we could make that thing easier to recycle, because the Starbucks coffee cup is actually one of the most difficult things to recycle. So how would we make it better? How could we as designers design a better coffee cup than this? Let's take a look at some ideas. We could, for a start, use recyclable materials, things like thermoplastics and metal and card. We can, on the other side of the coin, we can avoid things that are difficult to recycle. So we could avoid thermosets, we could avoid composites, and we could avoid plastics which use kind of weird and difficult to recycle additives inside them. One of the big things we can do is we can use few materials. So one of the problems with that Starbucks coffee cup is it's got loads of materials in it. It's got the plastic lid, it's got the cardboard cup, it's got the plastic coating on the cardboard cup, which is a different plastic from the lid. It's got the cardboard sleeve, it's got ink on it, and it's got glue holding the sleeve together. So there's quite a lot going on in that cup. We can improve its recyclability if we use fewer materials than that. We can also improve things if we clearly label which each material is, and that would make recycling a lot easier. Finally, we can look at making the product easier to disassemble. That's not so important with the Starbucks cup, but it could be for something a little bit more complicated. For example, if we were recycling components of a car or something like that, we'd have to make those components easy to pull apart and to separate. The second thing that we decided we could do as designers is we could design for reuse. And again, had we been in class, we would be looking at a discussion around redesigning the hairdryer here to be easier to reuse. What steps could we take to delay that thing going to landfill? Well, let's take a look at some of these things we could do here. For a start, we could build that thing to last. We could choose tough, durable materials, give it a long lifetime. All too often things are built to with low quality for cheapness. So we can make a decision right now to make that out of better, tougher, more durable materials. We could make, second thing I'm going to say is we could make the hairdryer easier to maintain and repair. In other words, we could make it so that we could repair it with a screwdriver. Linked to that is the idea that it should be easy to disassemble as well, so that we can replace components that are perhaps broken inside it. The hairdryer may otherwise be fine, but there's just one switch that's broken. We have to make that switch easy to get to. Don't know if you've ever tried to disassemble a modern mobile phone, particularly one of the iPhones, but it's almost impossible to do so, and therefore it is a difficult product to reuse again and again. One of the things we can do for reuse is we can use standard components. We can use fixings and screws and clips and things like that for which everyone has the tools to disassemble and reassemble. As designers, we can also, and finally here, is reject this idea of planned obsolescence. Now, planned obsolescence is a concept that we met earlier on in the course, but it's that idea that products are deliberately engineered so that they purposefully break early, that they become obsolete early. And historically, there was things around light bulbs failing so that they had to be replaced. But in modern times, I think one of the best examples of planned obsolescence is the idea of a toothbrush. Because a toothbrush has been engineered, well, the bristles of a toothbrush, that is, have been engineered with a plastic which actually degrades with water. So a toothbrush is engineered so that the bristles eventually wear out over time. It doesn't have to be so, they could choose other bristles, but nonetheless, toothbrushes as they are just now deliberately wear out, forcing us in our consumerist society to go ahead and replace toothbrushes over and over again. The final thing that we're going to look at here is the idea of designing for efficiency. Now, efficiency is all about energy use. Okay, and what we've got here is a picture of a kind of it's a kind of dresser table with a kind of illuminated mirror, something like you get in the theatre, something like that, right? So again, if we'd been in class, we'd be looking at ways that we could improve the efficiency use of this product here. Now, when I'm talking about efficiency, I'm not talking about the energy use of just the product on the screen. I'm talking about all of the energy that's involved in getting that product into your hands. So all of the energy that's used throughout its manufacture, its transportation, its use, and its disposal all have to be considered here. So let's take a look at some of the ways that we can improve the efficiency of the product design of this dresser table right here. Okay, well, for a start, we could look at making it an A-rated product. You will see these stickers on white goods and things like that, where products are particularly good for energy efficiency. We could make this product more lightweight. We could make it cheaper and easier and more efficient to transport around. So in other words, lorries and trucks don't spend as much energy delivering this thing to shops, and we don't spend as much energy taking it home to our homes as well. Because it's a piece of furniture, we could consider maybe even flat packing it. Because if you think about it, if this dresser is built, if you buy this dresser and it's already built and made and it's a big size, you can maybe only get 3 of them in a van. But if it's flat packed, then maybe we can get 30 of them in a van. That means we're making fewer journeys, we're using up less energy as we move these things around the country. A massive deal for efficiency is the idea that we could manufacture that dressing table entirely powered by renewables. That would be a big deal and a big way to improve the efficiency of this product. Also inside the factory, we could use production planning methods. We met them earlier on in the course as well, but we could be using things like Gantt charts and flow charts to identify points in the manufacture of this product where there are inefficiencies and therefore address them in the factory. And finally, minimal packaging as well, because the packaging incurs an energy cost as well. That cardboard box that your product arrives in, the cardboard box came from somewhere. It's probably been shipped from somewhere as well. So we've got to reduce the amount of packaging that's going on there as well. So let's recap. We're talking about design for the environment, and we looked initially at 3 big contentious ideas: the idea of consumerism and sustainability and the product life cycle. We then asked ourselves, well, how can a designer affect those things and improve the environmental credentials of a product? And we looked at design for recycling, design for reuse, and finally design for efficiency. And I'll leave you with this thought as well. When we are looking at the environmental impact of our products and we're looking at the impact that as designers we can have on the product, it's important to remember that you're considering the entire product life cycle, not just the design of the thing, but also how it's manufactured, how it's used, and how it's disposed.